Well, Minnesota Wild training camp is just days away, and Ben Gislason joins us to take a look at the Tom Kurvers Showcase to figure out some names that we might want to pay attention to when camp opens on Thursday. Not to mention, Kirsten and I look at the trajectory of Joel Eriksson Ek and try to figure out what Kirill Kaprizov needs to do to truly establish himself as the MVP in this league. As always, we're created by New Voice Studios, brought to you by SotaStick, presented by Talk North, Grainbelt, Royal Credit Union, Livea, and Jim Beam. This is Season 6, Episode 245. At Jim Beam, they know the importance of tradition, like chanting, "Let's play hockey" prior to the start of each game, or playing the state of hockey anthem after a Wild win. This season, raise one to your fan family with a bourbon that invites us all to come as friends and leave as family. Jim Beam Bourbon Whiskey, the official bourbon whiskey partner of the Minnesota Wild and XL Energy Center. Drink smart. Jim Beam Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. 40% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2021. James B. Beam Distilling Company, Incorporated, Claremont, Kentucky. Hello, everybody. What's up? We're back. Bardown Beauties, episode 245 of season 6. I'm Jessi Pierce, writer for NHL.com. She's Kirsten Krull, in-arena host for the Minnesota Wild. And joining us this week, Ben Gislason of the Iowa Wild, your broadcaster. Get to know him, get to know his voice. Ben, how we doing, buddy? Congratulations on the debut. This is exciting.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking about it all morning. I emailed you last night when you reached out saying, would you like to come on? I said, I'm looking forward to my debut indeed. I know you guys have a big following up in my home state of Minnesota, and looking forward to talking some shop with both of you today.
Before we dive into the Iowa Wild and the Tom Kurvers Showcase, which took place in St. Louis this past weekend, I hear you dabbled in some hockey. I hear that you had a hockey goal, in fact, playing, was it for Burnsville that you were playing for, that made SportsCenter top 10? Tell us a little bit about Regalus with the story, if you will.
Oh, wow. You did your homework. You had to dig deep to find that. Yeah, it was actually, so I grew up in Burnsville. I played my high school hockey at Breck High School. And during, I believe it was the 2010 state tournament, we scored 4 or 5 goals. It was some sort of, I don't know if it was a state record or what it was, but it was a quick enough span of time and enough goals where ESPN caught it. And it wasn't that special of a goal, but it was one of the 5. And so, yeah, it did make its way onto SportsCenter one night. That feels like a really long time ago now, back in 2010.
Did you have a 6 celly to go along with it?
No, the game, I was a very cornerstone shot blocking defenseman. So my buddies would have given me too much grief for if I would have celebrated too hard. Just the old classic hands in the air. It was a good pass that set up the goal, so I had the easy part.
Act like you've been there before, right?
Right, exactly.
You know, we saw some goals this weekend. Unfortunately, not as many for the Minnesota Wild in the showcase. They faced St. Louis and Chicago, losing to Chicago 4-2 on Friday, 6-2 to the host St. Louis Blues on Saturday. Ben, what did you see that you like? Let's start with maybe even Friday's game, because obviously the whole idea is to get a good look at all these guys and get them into some of those game situations against other future NHL prospects. But overall, what did you see from the weekend that you liked, or some areas that you think could really maybe use some improvement? Because a lot of these guys will be down with you and Iowa this year.
Yeah, they will. And you're exactly right, Jessi. Yes, anytime there's a scoreboard and you're keeping score, you want to win the game. But certainly there was no one leaving the arena that had their daubers down or were looking down at their feet leaving the arena. There was maybe a little bit more of a somber mood after the 6-2 loss than the 4-2 empty net loss on Saturday night against Chicago compared to Sunday with the Blues. But both games, well, first off, I was laughing with some of the guys because both of the Minnesota games had a lot of snarl to them. And I asked their broadcasters about the Chicago Blues matchup, and that wasn't there. So was Minnesota the bad boys of the tournament? I don't know. But they were entertaining hockey games. There obviously were players that people had their eyes on more than others. Riley Heidt is obviously one that's received a lot of attention recently about, can he maybe push his way into a spot in the National Hockey League this year with the fantastic year he had in the WHL last year with Prince George. He stood out right away. He had a fabulous opening game on Saturday against Chicago. Caden Bankier was another guy who came onto the scene a little bit later in the year for the Iowa Wild last year because of an injury, but he came on and scored immediately when he got in. He hit the skids a little bit in January and February, which happens to just about every rookie in the American League anyway, but he had a really strong finish. Those are the two guys that really jumped out right away. Bankier scored in both games. Height scored in the opening game against Chicago. And another guy that really, I don't know if people were expecting him to be as top of mind as he ended up being, was Stevie Leskovar, who it wound up being a goal against in the opening night game, but he hit Frank Nazar into the cheap seats at center ice. Clean, hard, open ice hit. It was something you would have seen from 1980s hockey, let alone something you don't often see in today's game. But he was running around and throwing hard, heavy. But the thing I liked about it was clean hits. He wasn't headhunting. He wasn't going out there to concuss anybody. He was throwing hard, heavy hits. And talking to him after the game, that's what he does. And even talking to Matt Hendricks, the Iowa Wild general manager, about Stevie a little bit more. So what do you like about him? And maybe why did Minnesota go after him? He said their D-core cupboard right now is obviously loaded with guys that we're hoping to be potential Minnesota Wild stars in the future. When you think about David Spacek, Carson Lambos, Kyle Masters, there's other players, Jack Pearce in that conversation too, but all of those players are a little similar in the way they play. They didn't have a guy in the cupboard like a Leskovar, who is a big guy at 6'4", 207, and he's only 20 years old. And he plays with what Matt Hendricks calls sandpaper. I pirated that, used it on the broadcast that night, because I think it's a great term. There's friction to his game, and he was someone that really jumped off the page, and I know that the group was very happy with, because he brings a different element that what Minnesota is looking at in their prospect cupboard as far as defensemen go right now. They don't have a lot of that.
You mentioned a lot about Leskovar, and this goes into my follow-up question on that. Would you say he's probably that one player that you saw that really surprised you? And on the flip side, is there one player who is maybe a little more underwhelming than you expected?
Yeah, I don't know if there was an underwhelming player. I didn't think at least I didn't notice height as much the second day as I did the first day. So maybe that might be my answer. And I don't know if underwhelm is the right term, but just compared to the night before, I didn't see his game pop as much as it did against Chicago. The one thing that I know that the staff was really pleased about with Riley was his defensive game. They were really happy with the way he was tracking back and making sure that Minnesota had numbers defensively for a lot of those games. That included on St. Louis, and obviously the brass watched the game with a lot finer tooth comb, or watch the game with a lot more of a finer tooth comb than I do. So to answer that, maybe Riley Height on Sunday's game. But I would agree. I think Leskovar is probably the guy that, again, you're looking at a 6th-round pick, and there have been some fantastic 6th-round picks in the history of the National Hockey League, but you're looking at 1st-round pick. You're looking at 2nd-round picks. Those are the players that have the noise around them. Guys like Hunter Hayde, who had some really nice moments too. Jack Pearce, a 2nd-round pick. Those are guys that they have higher expectations coming in. Leskovar, at least for the layman Minnesota Wild hockey fan, I had not seen Stevie play in person yet. He really did. He showed really well. And I think all these players, and I get to see this a lot in the American League working in my position, all these players are trying to find a niche. How do I get to the National Hockey League? Because the 1% of the 1% score their way in. Most people don't. And for Stevie Leskovar, he's looking at this saying, here's my way in. It's going to be to bring heavy body presence in every game, to be a bigger body, to take away space, to defend well. And he might jump over some defensemen in that category because maybe that's what Minnesota needs. You can only have so many two-way skating, mobile, vision-led defensemen. And if Stevie can be that guy, if he can be the best at that at his position, he might find his way up into the lineup sooner than some of the other guys might. So it's a good problem to have. And I know in Iowa, we're excited, not that we're going to see Stevie this year, but we're excited about the defensive core that was so young last year, and they're all a year older now. And a ton of them have taken some really good strides heading into their 2nd year pro.
Well, I think you're right too. You had mentioned it. Minnesota doesn't have anybody on their current projected roster, right? You've got your Chisholms, you got your Fabries, you got your Broads and your Spurgeons. That's great. Jake Middleton and Zach Bogosian are maybe your two bigger
Yeah.
bodied guys, but even that, they need to step that aspect up. And I know that's something Bill Guerin has really stressed. So, Stevie, way to listen to Billy G a little bit. I personally don't like to listen to him. He chirped me again today, guys. We're done. We're done with Billy. But speaking of defenseman, Carson Lambos, would you say he's pretty close to being that guy? I know he's a guy that Wild fans have been kind of clamoring for. He's been top of the prospect pool, been doing really good things in Iowa. How close is he to maybe really making that push for the NHL cut?
I don't want to speak for anyone on that. From my perch, it does feel like this is a really important year for Carson. Last year for Iowa, there were great strides everybody took, but I think that most players would tell you that they maybe didn't achieve the expectations they had for themselves. I know Carson would tell you that. He's told me that. He's been on record when we've done podcasts or interviews with him. He's a very straight shooter. He's not going to sugarcoat anything. And I know there were some stretches last year where Carson was not happy with what his first season was. Now, the one thing I love about Carson Lambos, and I talked about it a bit during, I forget if it was the St. Louis or the Chicago broadcast last weekend in St. Louis, Carson has leadership running in through his veins. He's such a leader. He's very mature for a player coming into his second year pro at 21 years of age. He's someone that understands that just because you think you're doing something right doesn't mean you are, and also just because you think you're doing something wrong doesn't mean you are. He's very mature. He's got all the tools, I think, to be a really strong defenseman in the National Hockey League. He's a gifted skater. And he really, as much as some of his offensive numbers in junior stand out at times, again, he'll be the first one to tell you that his game is utilizing that ability to read the play, using his IQ, not necessarily with the puck, but without it, and that skating ability. He shuts plays down and he gets pucks out of the zone on his own. And this year, it's about having those moments where you see him do it more consistently, because there were sample sizes of it last year, but they weren't long. It was here, it was there, it was a shift here, a string of shifts, a game here, 2 games. But now, can he start to do that 5 games, 10 games, 15 games? Can you start to put together this string of stretch of games where every night you're leaving the rink, win or lose, and saying, yeah, I did my job there, I'm progressing? And also for Carson, can he be the guy to really step ahead of that group of defensemen? I mentioned that I think really it's a bit of an open door. I think the opportunity's out there. David Spacek has been fantastic pretty much since March to the end of the year last year. Then he goes overseas and wins a world championship with Czechia. His confidence is sky high. He looked good, I thought, a good portion of both games against both St. Louis and Chicago. So it's a dogfight. And that's the term that Brett McLean, head coach of Iowa, has used. Just because you're a prospect, yes, that means you're going to play, but there's so many prospects that's not just, well, here you go, you're a prospect, you're going to play. You're competing with a lot of other players that have the Minnesota logo next to their name on the elite prospects page because they're draft picks too. And that's a really healthy thing to have going for Iowa this season.
And switching things up just a little bit, Ben, not only do you want the main club to have a good season, but you also want the farm team to be doing well. And last season, when you looked at Iowa, struggles a little bit because also the injury bug that riddened the Minnesota Wild. So knock on wood, fingers crossed, that doesn't happen again this year. How big of I'm trying to think of my words on the spot here. How huge will it be to hopefully have more consistency with players you expect to be starters down in Iowa this season?
It is quite literally everything in the American League, Kirsten. If you get strung out in your roster for a stretch of time, and Iowa had, probably 2 to 3 long windows of it last year, because again, Minnesota had it too. And this is my 5th year in the American Hockey League, so now I'm starting to really understand the ebbs and flows of it. It happens to every team. Every organization has it, where your big club gets dinged up, and then you have this exodus of all of your best players. It's always how it works. But teams are built to absorb that. Now, what happened to Iowa last year, you had the exodus, the fact that they didn't have their captain all year. By the way, 2 years running, the Iowa Wild captain has become a mainstay in the National Hockey League. So it's a blessing or a curse, depending on how you look at it. Yes, Mason Shaw 2 years ago, and now Dakota Mermis last year. So whoever's coming to Iowa for camp has to be pining for that C. At least I would be if I was in any of their shoes. But what ended up happening to Iowa last year is every team gets that one scenario where everyone's dinged up at once, but then usually those players come back. For Iowa last year, Mermis goes up. We never really see him again. Lettieri goes up. We never really see him again. Later in the season, Jake Lucchini goes up. That was about halfway through. We never really see him again. And in the midst of that, there were obviously more call-ups that happened, but Iowa also lost Jujhar Khaira in December, and that team with him was really just starting to, they were cruising along. They had a good November. They played a really good Hershey Bears team out in Hershey in front of 10,000 plus people both nights, which in the American League is a lot of people. Great energy, great crowd, great games, and they felt confident. They had a great swing through Colorado where they swept the Eagles, another good Western Conference team in the American Hockey League, and then they lose Nick Swaney right before they lose Jujhar Khaira. And so it was this crazy occurrence where all of a sudden you had both teams so dinged up, which means Iowa pays double for that because you're going to lose your best players. And then you also lose a few of your other best players that are still around due to injury. And Khaira was out all year. Swaney was out all year. We never saw them again. I obviously mentioned Lettieri and Lucchini and Mermis, and that's a little bit of a sample size of what happened. I think the article at the end of the year that Matt Hendricks did, I think it was Joe Smith who wrote it with The Athletic. The quote I thought Matt had was perfect. It was the perfect storm. Like all of the wrong things happened. And that doesn't mean if they don't all happen, you win a Calder Cup, but they were still in the playoff hunt towards the end of the year. They weren't that far out of it going into the middle of March, amazingly enough. And I know Brett McLean had that group playing really, really hard hockey, trying to be hard to play against. And fast forwarding to this year, the one thing that it's a blessing to Iowa that Minnesota didn't have the cap space to go out and make any big swings in the offseason, because what did we see? A host of two-way signings. Mm-hmm. So there's this army of two-way signings now. So when this mess happens and Minnesota gets hurt and Iowa gets hurt at the same time, we think that there should be more of a robust pool to pick from to help Iowa get through those stretches without losing as many games, because really what you're trying to do when you're in that situation is just go 500. When you're playing with your B squad, just don't lose 3, 4, 5 games in a row. Just muddy your way through it, get through it, find your way through, and then eventually, hopefully, some of those players that you can count on will come back down because Minnesota will eventually get healthy, and then Iowa does in turn as well.
Cheers to a healthier season all around, huh?
Amen to that.
Hope.
Yes.
It's all we need. And for the record, Bill Guerin has sent me down to Iowa, by the way, because I was late. So I'll be seeing you down there much more this season. If you want to have Kirsten and I out, we'd be happy to come check a game.
We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you. Please keep me in the loop on that, and we'll roll out the red, or should I say the green carpet for you both.
Ooh, yes. I like this. You like how we put you on the spot to make sure that this happens. Like this is recorded out there for the public so everybody can come at you when it doesn't happen, or if it doesn't happen.
My hands are tied now. We're in 100%.
We love to put people in a position where they can't say no. Honestly, that's the best strategy we've ever come up with. It works every time.
Jake Lucchini owes us a golf round because I believe we made him promise. Jake Middleton as well. We've made them all promise to golf with us. They haven't done it yet.
Grace Zumwinkle as well.
Grace Zumwinkle as well. So
Breck High School on there, Grace Zumwinkle. Go Mustangs.
There you go.
Yeah.
Blake Wheeler was a Breck, right?
That's right, he was. He was. Yeah.
That's how old I am. Blake Wheeler's my era. When you said 2010 made you feel old, that was my college era, for crying out loud. I tell you what.
Luch will pay up, by the way. He's a good man. You just keep on him. He'll pay up. He's an honest guy.
Yeah. We'll get on that. Ben, where can people catch Iowa Wild games if they're not heading down 35 to Des Moines, and where can they follow along with you and all of the prospect content as you guys get geared up for the 24-25 season as well?
Yeah, we're thrilled about it. Yeah, our 13th year down in Des Moines, and each year seems to keep getting that much better for us and the community that we have down there. And we're a very well-known organization. You see the logo out around Des Moines everywhere. I go out to the grocery store, I go out to dinner. It's funny, it's crazy how often I see the Wild logo down there. And so we're thrilled about our year. Home opener is October 12th against the Manitoba Moose. We hope we don't see Mason Shaw, 1, because we don't want to play against him, 2, because we want to see him play in the National Hockey League. But October 12th, our home opener, if you do want to tune in, best way to do it, if you want to see the prospects, if you don't want to just count on me illustrating the game to you on radio would be, it's actually Flow Sports is the new streaming partner of the American Hockey League. It was AHL TV last year. I've been told they should be very similar because Flow Sports and AHL TV have partnered up. So it's a streaming option. We're really proud of our broadcast. We're actually we're the only team right now in the American Hockey League that runs at home a full slated, tailored broadcast where we have pregame shows and postgame shows and intermission shows that go on during our home games. And that includes exclusive content that we sit down with our players. And the big goal for us is obviously we want people to get to know the players as players, but we want to get our fans to know the players as people too. And that is one of the areas that I think that our broadcast does a really good job of, is let's pull the curtain back and let's learn more about what it was like when Carson Lambos was growing up in Winnipeg, and in the town that Lambos built, as he's always critiqued on whenever we go up there to play the Moose. So yeah, Flow Sports, head to the AHL website or to the Iowa Wild website. You can check out how to get your hands on a subscription pass there. But if you want to go the old fashioned way, if you're blue collar and want to tune in on the terrestrial radio, if you're up here in Minnesota, iHeartRadio app, you can easily pick that up on 106.3 KXNO radio.
We love it. Benny, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to check in with you. I'm sure we'll be seeing you quite frequently in and around the St. Paul area. And hey, go Wild.
Yeah, indeed. Go Wild. Thanks so much for having me on. Great to chat with both of you. And it goes both ways. Now that you said you're putting me on the spot about coming down to Iowa, I'm expecting you both to come down to Iowa now. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, we better see you down there this year.
Done.
I'm so in. I'm a Cyclone, I went to Iowa State. So I
did not know that.
I did. Yeah.
Big Cy hockey year this year for you then.
So good. It was so good. It was, just everything. And now the Gophers need to beat Iowa, and it's the perfect year for me. That's all I need.
There you go.
I have no Iowa connections, but I'll be there.
Love it.
All right, guys, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back. Hey guys, Jessi Pierce here for Livea Weight Control Centers. Did you know that Livea is the trusted leader in safe and effective weight loss? Their team of experts will create a personalized plan that is easy to follow, and the one-on-one support will help you get to your weight loss goals. Just look at me. I am down nearly 30 pounds. Couldn't be more thrilled. The one-on-one support I get at my Woodbury clinic, in addition to the nutrition plan and Livea Medical, has helped me lose the weight and keep it off. I couldn't be more thrilled, you guys. Join Livea today and you could get 8 weeks free. That's right, 8 weeks absolutely free. Livea is the destination for all weight loss solutions. If you're interested in their medical option, visit livea.com to get more information and decide if that's right for you. Again, join today and get 8 weeks absolutely free. Call 855-GO-LIVEA or visit livea.com. That's livea.com. Let them know Jessi Pierce and the Bardown Beauties sent ya. Shout out to Ben. Always good to check in with the prospects, especially since self-admittedly I don't know a heck of a whole lot. I would agree with him. I think kind of the highlights or the different things that I've seen or read sounds like Hunter Haight and Riley Height. Yes, Hunter Haight, Riley Height. I just have
That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. Sounds like they had a decent showing, but it definitely felt like they could use for sure at least a year or two down in the American Hockey League. I think Caden Bankier and David Spashik are two of those guys that are very, very close as well. So they might be some players that you want to keep an eye on when Minnesota Wild opens training camp at Tria on Thursday. Kirsten, we're almost there. Can you taste it? Can you smell it? Can you feel the return of hockey? Because I know my schedule is already bonkers this week because hockey's here.
I can feel it, and it really snuck up on me because I'm just filling out my planner here earlier today, and I'm looking ahead next week. Next Friday, we have the first preseason home game, 27th. That's crazy. And not to mention, then it's the NAHL Showcase going on in Blaine, too. So a combo of that, it's all going to hit at once. It is crazy how fast it snuck up.
I know I caught up with a couple of the guys. They were at the Wild Off the Tee out at the Royal today. And all of them kind of said the same thing. Like it's, again, that back to school, like, hey, how was your summer? How are you? And a lot of them were like, it went by fast, but it was really nice and long too. Although, as Jake Middleton said, too long, right? None of those guys want to be having that much of the off season off. But it was good. And yes, Bill Guerin continued to be hard on me. So that was fun.
I love that he's helping me keep you accountable when I'm not around. It's incredible.
Doubled down. I told him I still believe in my Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl take, and he just audibly sighed. It's a shame. It's a shame that we're not going to be friends this year.
Maybe he audibly sighed because he wanted to find a way to bring him to Minnesota, and he can't.
He can't. Speaking of really good players, though, on the Minnesota Wild roster, I want to talk about Joel Eriksson Ek and Kirill Kaprizov, two, I think, the top offensive players for your Minnesota Wild, without question. And you might be saying, duh, cool, Jessi, thanks for that. But I want to talk about the evolution of Joel Eriksson Ek for a minute, right? Not to mention, Joel, very smiley today. I know he's your favorite. I love you. I loved when you asked. I love you. I also love you. But I loved when you asked Kevin Gorg, I'm going to say one name and just go off. I want to ask you the same thing. I'm going to say Joel Eriksson Ek. I want you just to go off before I dive into his evolution.
I just like get butterflies because I love him so much. Not in like a romantic way, but just like he's that guy you see out on the ice and you're like, God, I just want him to succeed. He's deserved so much more. And maybe not so much even like last year, the year before. I think people really finally started to see his value. Not even that they hadn't before, but he just finally, I think, got the respect that he absolutely deserved. The biggest thing with Joel Eriksson Ek is Kevin Gorg said it himself too last week. He does all of those little things that you might not necessarily notice, but he does them and he executes them and does them every single game. He gets in those corners. He gets up in players' faces. He makes the plays. He is a playmaker. And he's got the size to him as well. And so when we've gone through the phases where he's unfortunately gotten injured, you've seen how detrimental that is to the Minnesota Wild because yes, Kirill Kaprizov, Kevin Gorg said this perfectly too. So I'm taking another one of his quotes. I can't even take credit for this. Yes, Kirill Kaprizov is the best player on the team, but Joel Eriksson Ek is the most irreplaceable player on the team.
Right. He's just got such an incredible impact. Now, I remind you, he was a first round pick, number 20 for your Minnesota Wild. But you've seen him just continue to ascend upward and really grow into that player, just the body size, the way that he has that net front presence. His first year, 3 goals. His second year, 6 goals. Third year, 7 goals. Fourth year, 8. Then it went to 19, then 26, then 23. Last year, he finally eclipsed that 30-goal mark with 64 points to go along with it. I think it's not crazy to think that he could be a 40-goal scorer just because of those dirty, gritty areas in the goals. I do see him more as of the playmaker a little bit and setting up that assist, or again, getting the puck in front and passing to the side, maybe for Zuccarello to come in and finish, or whoever that might be, whoever his line looks like. But it's just been incredible because he's another player that there's had to be a level of patience, right? But also they put him in the right situations. I think Joel Eriksson Ek is a prime example as to how an organization can really shape the player by giving them those opportunities in the right spots. You look at Marco Rossi, he was given the right opportunities last year, right? And I think that's why it's important to remember that heading into training camp this year, because you need to make sure that guys like Liam Ogren or Marat Huznadinov are put in the right spots. You don't want to bury them down. And again, not that Joel Eriksson Ek has had this presence his entire career, but they gave him the right opportunities at the right time. So I urge Bill Guerin and company to do the same thing with some of these other guys, especially Liam Ogren, because Liam Ogren, I think, with the offside that he's not necessarily a centerman like Ek, they have the same body build and kind of that same presence. He's got the same kind of hard shot as well. I could see a lot of similarities in that if you treat him the right way. I think I need him to make the roster out of camp. I do. I think I need to see it.
I really want him to. And also just 2 more quick things on Joel Eriksson Ek because I could talk about him all day.
We're going to do it just a straight up. This is a Joel podcast. I keep going back and forth if I'm going to ask to get him on. I just, in our conversation.
Literally, I've had 2 requests. Both of them probably never going to happen. I've had 2 players that I want more than anything on the pod. Jonas and Joel, and both are probably a fat no.
I'm going to play. It's not even necessarily if they were to say no, like even if they were to say yes, and I adore both of them. There's nothing. I will play my interview with Joel from today, and you'll just be like, oh, he'll just, yeah. Like there's just nothing there. I'm
fairly confident I could get something out of him.
I don't think
because I'm that passionate about talking to him. I'm determined to get something, even if I have to pull teeth for like 20 minutes just to get something, I'm getting it. That's how
they're fake.
Oh yeah. Because I've seen him lose some teeth in the game before, but anyways, back to what I was going to say. Maybe this is a hot take going off what you said. If Joel Eriksson Ek this season stays healthy, consistently healthy, does not miss exponential time due to injury. A game or two here, there, sure, whatnot. He'll be 40 goal scorer. No doubt in my mind.
That's what
also, my second question, because we've said this before, we've gone around in circles. This is my question for you. Do you think Joel Eriksson Ek would be a top center for a team other than the Minnesota Wild?
Like literally your number one center.
Yep.
No, I don't.
No,
I still don't. I've said that before, though. I don't think he's definitely grown. I think he's a number two, maybe in a lot of other areas, but I think number one, that's hard. That's hard for any team to achieve. That's hard for any player to achieve that. There's not Nathan McKinnon's and Connor McDavid's just roaming around, right? Like there's very few in this league that I consider a number one center. There's Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon, Crosby's a center, right? Sidney Crosby. And like those four guys, right? Like Joel Eriksson Ek doesn't fit into that mix.
I feel like that's almost not even fair because you're mixing in Hall of Famers.
But that's where I'm saying those are the only people I consider number center. I'm not tossing in random names either. You know what I mean? Like it's very hard to be a top center in this league.
You're not wrong. He's a very good center. I do think he could be a top line center. Maybe not for every team. There's a lot of teams.
Well, teams that are below Minnesota, maybe. That's a different story.
I still think even some above Minnesota.
Like who?
We'll get into this later. I'm just gonna let this sit right now.
All right. I can't wait.
Next week. We'll circle back next week because I'm gonna bring up Joel every single week. So just gotta spread the wealth out a little bit.
Gotta do it. Before we end this week's episode, I wanted to talk about Kirill Kaprizov too. There is no question that Kirill is elite, although Kirsten, once upon a time, you did say that you weren't sure that he was a superstar in this league.
I said yet.
Yep. I'm not coming at you for it. I didn't disagree with the comment. I still don't disagree with the comment.
The other commenters did disagree with me and came for my throat.
Come at us. What do you think though Kirill needs to do this season to really put himself in that elite category? I mean, he's 27 years old. In 278 games played, he's got 330 points, 160 goals, and is a plus 52. And now he, again, easy 40 goal scorer. I think you and I both agreed he could be very close to 50 this year. It would not surprise me if he stays healthy. Year one, he had 27 goals and 51 points in 55 games. Year two, 47 goals, 108 points in 81 games. Again, that was the only time he played a full season was that year two, right? Minus that one game. 40 goals and 75 points in 67 games. Year four last year, 46 goals and 96 points in 75. So that he led the team in scoring. And each of those years, he's very good. No question about it. Best Minnesota Wild player. And NHL actually recently ranked Kirill Kaprizov number 7 in their wing rankings. Ahead of him are Jason Robertson, Artemi Panarin, David Pastrnak, Mikko Rantanen, Matthew Tkachuk, and Nikita Kucherov. The things that I think set those guys apart from Kirill is obviously health, right? A lot of those, I mean, besides for Mikko Rantanen, who's hurt quite a bit, they've been able to stay healthy. For Tkachuk, I think it's special teams prowess. I think Kirill is obviously your power play specialist. You love that, but I think there needs to be a little bit more.
I'm going to interject real quick too. I think part of that with Tkachuk is he's got a swagger that cannot be replicated. And that does mean something.
Yeah. And he's loud about it too, right? Like,
whereas Kirill's very, very team, like not that saying Tkachuk's not a team guy, but Kirill's very like, take the attention off me. Let's spread the wealth out a little more.
So what do you think? And I mean, I'm not saying that the NHL is turning a blind eye to Kirill, right? They tend to figure Minnesota, but Kirill does get his attention. He gets his warrant. But would you consider him right now as an elite NHLer? Do you think he's still kind of on this cusp? Or how do we get that to be fact, right? Like, how do you get that to be he's Connor Bedard except in Minnesota, right? Like, I mean, and that's a little bit different a situation and scenario. I'm just wondering, I just don't feel like Kirill's in that conversation just yet. He's definitely the best Minnesota's ever had. He's definitely going to go down as that. But how do you think he gets there? And then in that exchange, just something I thought of, would that entice him to stay if he reaches that elite status, or does that just make him more thirsty to get somewhere else, a different market, a bigger market once his contract gets closer to the end?
I think Kirill is still on that upward trajectory. He has not declined. He's still working his way up there. I think this season, there's 2 definite things that I think could help get him to that next level, because he's close. He's really, really close. And then a third thing, I'm not confident we'd see it from him no matter where he was at. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But the two things, obviously health. We saw, especially at the start of last season, maybe what had been said, at least when Dean Evason was still there, that injury he took from a hit from Winnipeg was still lingering, still was not the same player. The other thing besides health is he needs to get off to a faster start, stay consistent all throughout the season is the biggest thing I would say. That was the number one complaint about Kirill last year, is that he took a while to get going. And it's like, it started to make the media, the fans nervous. Understandably, he's your top player, best on the Wild. You expect more from him. And then the other thing that I think would really elevate him, but I don't know if we're going to see it, and it's just me when I think of, you talk about those elites, you throw around Matthew Tkachuk, Austin Matthews. Again, going back to that swagger, that personality. Maybe not everyone is as loud as a Matthew Tkachuk, but just, I think part of that too, the conversation around Kirill is, yeah, he's just a very quiet guy. And it doesn't really give too much for the public to really know about him. And so I think that is a big factor, maybe not even on the ice, that plays into maybe why he's not as heavily into that conversation.
Yeah, even Ovechkin had that swagger about him, right? Like Ovechkin puts his stamp, and there's different levels of superstardom with that, and there's different reactions to it. And it's kind of an endearing quality that Kirill is as humble as he is as well. We're not trying to take away from that. But yeah, you're right. I think that's an element, especially in today's NHL, in today's society, as they continue to try to get more attention. You need players willing to play that role too. And it's interesting to see. I want to know what you guys think. As always, we want to know what you think about Joel, what you think about Kirill, what you guys think about the prospects, what things you want to know at training camp. Of course, I will be in attendance each and every day, probably. Yay. And then I have to go back to work. Set little violin. You want to do
This is literally just had to whip out the violin real quick. Real quick.
I know. It's great. We love it. We love it. As always, we love you guys. Love SotaStick, Talk North, Grain Belt, Royal Credit Union, and Livea. We're super excited to announce more information about our live shows coming up soon. I think you guys are really going to like the news announcement.
I really like it, and I'm hard to please.
Yeah, this is true. She's high maintenance over there. Also, before we go to, I want to, and I don't mean to put this at the end, want to give a shout out to John Merrill. I know we are very hard on him about his on-ice play, but I reiterate what a tremendous human being he is off the ice. He actually recently officiated at one of the transgender championship tournaments this last weekend for the Transgender League, or an LGBTQ plus. Yes, thank you. I guys, words can be hard sometimes. But he just really put himself into the entire idea, and it just again speaks to how much he truly cares about that community. And I think that speaks volumes about who he is as a person and his character. And again, he does it without the fanfare, without the accolades, but I want to give it to him. I want to give him his flowers because I think that's so cool that he goes out there and does that. So round of applause for John Merrill. Again, love you and everything that you do off the ice. Sometimes on the ice, it's just a little frustrating. It's all.
Retweet. Like, I don't have anything else to add. John Merrill, certified great guy.
Retweet. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, that's all. Retweet this episode, retweet and reshare all of our other content that we have coming out. As always, like, subscribe, rate, share. We will be back next week, and hockey season is now in full swing, baby. See you later. Near